On October 27, 1942, dawn was just breaking over the Pacific, 420 nautical miles northeast of Guadalcanal, as USS Northampton drifted over the calm yet perilous waters. On the deck, Commander Edward P. Parker gripped the railing tightly, his eyes fixed on the fiery waters ahead. Before him lay a horrifying sight. The hull of USS Hornet slowly sinking, flames from ruptured fuel tanks illuminating the sea, turning the ocean into a blazing mirror reflecting the disaster of American naval power. In his personal journal, he scribbled a grim note. 4 aircraft carriers in 10 months. At this rate, we'll have nothing left by Christmas. Had his superiors read those words, he might have faced disciplinary action for pessimism. But in that moment, Parker had no mind for punishment. He was witnessing firsthand the cost of war, the collapse of American naval strength in the Pacific. This was the 4th aircraft carrier the U.S. had lost in 1942. Before it, similar fates had befallen USS Lexington at the Battle of the Coral Sea on May 8th, USS Yorktown at Midway on June 7th, and USS Wasp off Guadalcanal on September 15th. Each lost ship was not merely a fleet asset, it symbolized American power, a lifeline for Marines fighting on distant islands. Officers, sailors, and pilots gazed at the sunken hulls, filled with fear and despair, yet aware that the war continued, and that their fates remained tied to military decisions made in the next crucial minutes. Even more tragic was the strategic reality behind these defeats. The U.S. entered the Pacific War with 7 aircraft carriers, while Japan possessed 10, and in just 10 months, Japan had destroyed more than half of America's carrier force. Combined with America's inability to rapidly reproduce carriers, the strategic situation seemed dire. The history of 20th-century naval warfare rarely records a period when a nation faced successive losses of its capital ships, particularly in a war where control of the seas determined life or death. By early 1942, the situation had become clear. The Battle of the Coral Sea was a warning shot. USS Lexington, one of 2 massive pre-war American carriers converted from cruiser hulls, was hit by 2 torpedoes and 3 bombs from Japanese planes. Though the crew fought valiantly to control the damage, fuel from ruptured tanks triggered catastrophic secondary explosions, sinking the ship and claiming 216 lives. This first loss underscored that carrier warfare was not just about tactics on deck, but also about numbers and resources. A month later, at Midway, USS Yorktown, repaired in only 48 hours after Coral Sea, faced another grim fate. Shortly after, on September 15th, USS Wasp off Guadalcanal suffered 3 torpedo hits from Japanese submarine I-19. The ship burned for hours before being scuttled by the destroyer Landdown to prevent capture. Strategic calculations became clear. A small fleet could not go toe-to-toe with Japan, and losing a single ship meant losing numerical advantage, increasing risk for the remaining forces. Finally, on October 26, 27, the Battle of Santa Cruz unfolded. USS Hornet, veteran of the Doolittle Raid and Midway, became the next victim of coordinated attacks by Japanese bombers and torpedo planes. Efforts to save the ship, including towing it out of danger, failed against the overwhelming Japanese force. In the early hours of October 27th, Japanese destroyers Makigumo and Akigumo completed what aircraft had begun, sinking Hornet. After this defeat, the U.S. had only 1 operational carrier, USS Enterprise, facing 10 Japanese carriers, creating a seemingly hopeless scenario. In this context, Admiral Ernest King, commander of the U.S. Navy, had to report to Congress. "Gentlemen, we have 1 carrier operational. She faces 10 Japanese carriers. Simple arithmetic shows we have lost." These cold, precise numbers reflected the strategic nightmare confronting the United States. Yet, in the darkest moments, unknown actors, like Margaret Thompson, a young welder in Newport News, and millions of other American workers were poised to enter shipyards, laying the groundwork for a production miracle. The key lesson was that the U.S. had learned what naval history confirms. Victory depends not only on battles, but also on resilience and continuous production. The temporary collapse of the carrier force was not the end, but a catalyst for America to develop an unprecedented naval manufacturing revolution. Thanks to technical innovations, labor organization, and the determination of millions of Americans, lost carriers would not merely be replaced. They would be multiplied, propelling the U.S. from the brink of defeat to absolute dominance in the Pacific. Thus, the story of 1942 stands as a living testament to the interplay of tragedy and hope, of defeat and extraordinary recovery. The loss of 4 carriers was a profound shock but also a turning point, sparking America's industrial miracle and laying the foundation for ultimate victory. This disaster was not only a loss of material and lives, but also a lesson in the arithmetic of war, the vital role of production capacity in determining the outcome of a modern conflict. In the darkest moment for the U.S. Navy, when only USS Enterprise remained standing against 10 Japanese aircraft carriers, few realized that a revolution was quietly taking shape on land. From Newport News, Virginia, Margaret Thompson, a young welder who had never handled heavy tools before, stepped into the shipyard with eyes full of curiosity and determination. She did not know that her hands would become a vital weapon for America, that from here every weld, every steel plate laid on the shop floor would help turn the fate of the fleet around. Immediately after Pearl Harbor and the successive losses, shipyard leaders began to realize that traditional shipbuilding methods, crafting each ship manually, assembling each component piece by piece, could not meet the urgent demands of war. Henry Kaiser, the brilliant industrialist famed for producing Liberty ships, saw that if the U.S. wanted to make up for its losses, it needed a complete revolution in shipbuilding, where productivity would become the decisive factor in victory. One of the most important breakthroughs was the shift from riveting to welding. Previously, assembling a hull required thousands of rivets, each taking hours to inspect and ensure strength. One day, Helen Matthews, a former seamstress recruited into the emergency shipyard workforce, watched workers join steel plates and asked, "Why not stitch continuously like sewing fabric instead of fastening one rivet at a time?" Initially, managers laughed at the question, but they soon realized that seamless welding could reduce construction time by up to 75%. And welding skills could be taught to anyone in a few days, rather than the years required for traditional riveters. The concept of prefabrication also began to be widely applied. Instead of installing every part directly on the ship, components such as elevators, control rooms, and engine compartments were fully assembled on shore and then lifted onto the ship by massive cranes. This method not only saved time but also improved quality, as parts could be inspected and welded in a controlled environment rather than on the cramped, shaky deck. Thanks to this approach, the time to complete an aircraft carrier dropped from several years to just 15 to 20 months, a speed unprecedented in naval history. Technological changes went hand in hand with a dramatic shift in manpower. Shipyards became melting pots for millions of Americans, including women, African Americans, and immigrants, groups previously limited to light work or even excluded from heavy industry. Emma Rodriguez, a Mexican mother of 3 who had never held a heavy hammer before, became the fastest riveter at the Norfolk shipyard, able to set 30 perfect rivets per minute. James Washington, a black farmer from Alabama, was trained to become a master fuel pipe engineer at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, installing fuel systems on 5 aircraft carriers consecutively, each faster than the last. Alongside manpower, production organization, and supply chains were completely restructured. Steel for decks came from Pittsburgh, Alcoa in Tennessee supplied aluminum for aircraft aboard the ships, and Goodyear in Akron, Ohio, manufactured aircraft brake cables, each capable of stopping a 12,000-pound fighter traveling at 100 miles per hour. All these materials were shipped to shipyards across the U.S., from Newport News and Brooklyn to Philadelphia and Richmond, California, continuously, 24/7, ensuring that no assembly line was ever interrupted. Meanwhile, at sea, the number of Japanese carriers continued to grow, and they believed the U.S. could not make up for its losses. But the production race had begun, and every day hundreds of American workers labored tirelessly. They were not just building ships, they were racing against death. Each day without a new carrier meant more American and Allied lives lost on distant islands. On every shipyard wall, posters reminded them, USS Enterprise fights alone. She needs sisters. Build them now. These messages were not mere slogans. They were commands for survival. The combination of technical innovation and human determination had an immediate effect. By 1943, Essex-Class carriers began rolling off the lines at unprecedented speed. USS Essex was laid down on April 28, 1941, and commissioned just 20 months later. Other shipyards adopted the modular construction method, assembling sections on shore and then lifting them onto ships, saving weeks, even months. Production speed skyrocketed. By January 1943, a new carrier launched every 60 days. By June, every 45 days. By December, a new Essex-Class carrier was ready every 30 days. This technology was not limited to the main carriers. Henry Kaiser applied it to escort carriers, or jeep carriers, which protected invasion fleets and hunted submarines. At the Vancouver shipyard, the lead USS Casablanca escort carrier was completed in less than 8 months from keel laying to commissioning. Meanwhile, a Japanese escort carrier, Shino, converted from a passenger ship, took 2 years to complete, a staggering difference in production speed. This industrial rise was reinforced by a unique pilot training system. To ensure ships were not rendered useless by a lack of crews, the U.S. transformed the Great Lakes into a training ground. USS Wolverine and USS Sable, 2 paddle steamers converted into training carriers, trained 500 pilots per month by 1944. As a result, not only were ships ready, but their crews were prepared, creating a complete combat cycle from shipbuilding to training, ready for deployment to the front lines. These innovations, combined with the extraordinary labor of millions of workers, allowed the Essex-Class numbers to grow faster than any competitor could match. Japan watched in astonishment through intelligence reports. Commander Masatake Yokomiya, a Japanese naval officer, noted in his diary, "The U.S. is building carriers faster than we can train pilots. Each new ship outperforms us. We are no longer fighting the same Navy that attacked Pearl Harbor." The disaster of 1942 thus became the spark for America's production revolution. Workers from Margaret Thompson to Emma Rodriguez, from James Washington to millions of anonymous laborers, were not merely building ships. They were building confidence, hope, and victory. Every weld, every steel plate laid on the floor was a direct response to the losses at Midway, Coral Sea, Guadalcanal, and Santa Cruz. They proved that even if a nation lost carriers, true power lay not only in the ships themselves, but in the industrial capacity and determination of the people behind them. These technological and human innovations not only saved the U.S. fleet, but also transformed the face of national industry. Modular techniques, advanced welding, prefabrication, and assembly lines became the new standard, not only for wartime shipbuilding but for post-war industry. Women, African Americans, and previously restricted groups demonstrated their abilities, creating a wave of significant social change. As 1943 began, the impact of production innovations became evident. The first Essex-Class carriers, USS Essex, USS Yorktown, CV-10, and USS Intrepid, were launched and commissioned at a pace previously unimaginable. Each ship was not merely a replacement for the lost carriers. They were stronger, faster, and more capable, able to carry 90-100 aircraft and reach speeds of 33 knots, outperforming most enemy destroyers and cruisers. At shipyards in Brooklyn, Newport News, and Philadelphia, each day pulsed like a heartbeat of a massive industrial engine. In Brooklyn, worker Giuseppe Diageo and his team developed prefabrication techniques for elevators, assembling them completely on shore before hoisting them onto ships with giant cranes. This method alone saved up to 6 weeks per vessel. In Richmond, California, engineer Henry Kaiser applied modular construction to escort carriers, creating a complementary line to the Essex-Class fleet, providing protection and support for Pacific Island invasions. Industrial innovation went hand in hand with an unprecedentedly diverse workforce. Women made up 40% of Kaiser's workforce, many of whom had never handled mechanical tools before the war. Emma Rodriguez, now a model of precision and speed, could set 30 perfect rivets per minute, so flawless that engineers had to inspect every weld to ensure no errors remained. African Americans, empowered by Executive Order 8802, could now hold high-skilled technical positions in shipyards, excelling in tasks from fuel pipe installation to engine inspection, breaking long-standing social barriers. Meanwhile, the nationwide supply chain operated like a finely tuned orchestra. Steel from Pittsburgh, aluminum from Tennessee, brake cables from Akron, electrical components from Detroit, all transported at breakneck speed to shipyards where they were installed into each Essex-Class carrier. Every standardized part, no matter where it was produced, fit precisely into ships built in Newport News or Brooklyn, ensuring minimal assembly time. When USS Hornet, CV-12, was launched in November 1943 and USS Franklin, CV-13, in January 1944, Japan began to grasp the strategic shift. In Tokyo, Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa and intelligence officer Captain Toshikazu Omi monitored reports. "We defeated them at Santa Cruz, but every ship they lose is replaced threefold. We are no longer fighting the old fleet, but a new naval force, far beyond our pilot training and preparation capabilities." The Essex-Class production rate exceeded all calculations, creating unimaginable psychological pressure on Japanese leadership. It was not only quantity, but also the quality and tactical versatility of the Essex-Class that amazed Japan. With nearly 100 aircraft capacity, combat groups could deploy multiple fighter, bomber, and torpedo squadrons simultaneously. Combined with advanced radar and optimized flight deck design, each Essex-Class became a center of sea power, capable of dominating any naval engagement. Rapidly built Kaiser escort carriers protected fleets, hunted submarines, and supported amphibious landings, creating a coordinated system where American ships perfectly complemented each other, both in navigation and aerial tactics. To ensure ships were not rendered useless by a shortage of aircrews, the U.S. implemented a pilot training program on the Great Lakes. USS Wolverine and USS Sable, paddle steamers converted into training carriers, trained 500 pilots per month by 1944, providing the necessary personnel for the new Essex-Class and escort carriers. Combined with superior production capacity, the U.S. began fielding the most powerful carrier force in the world in both numbers and crew quality. The strategic effectiveness of the Essex-Class boom became apparent quickly. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 was the first proof. Ozawa led 6 Japanese carriers against 9 Essex-Class and 8 light carriers of the U.S. fleet. The result was a decisive defeat. Japan lost nearly 600 aircraft and almost its entire pool of experienced pilots. Admiral Ozawa later described it. "It was not a battle, it was an execution." The Essex-Class fleet did not merely win at sea, it shifted the strategic balance in the Pacific thanks to superior numbers, quality, and deployment capabilities. While naval campaigns raged, production continued unabated. In Brooklyn, Newport News, and Kaiser shipyards, multiple ships were built simultaneously. USS Lake Champlain, laid down in March 1944, was completed in just 15 months, a wartime record. Each subsequent Essex-Class was completed faster than the previous one due to experience, continuous improvement, and seamless coordination between technology and labor. The social impact of the production revolution was equally significant. Richmond, California, S population grew from 23,000 to 130,000 in 3 years as workers flocked to Kaiser A.S. shipyard. Wages paid to millions of workers exceeded $3 billion, creating a new middle class and transforming the U.S. economic and social structure. Women, African Americans, and previously restricted groups proved capable of performing complex industrial tasks, from welding and assembly to operating heavy machinery. This was a workforce revolution, paving the way for lasting changes in labor rights and social equality after the war. By 1945, the results were clear. The U.S. had 14 Essex-Class carriers in combat, 3 more newly launched, but not yet deployed, along with 9 Independence-class light carriers and 71 escort carriers. This force completely overwhelmed Japan, which had only 6 operational carriers, most with inadequately trained pilots, and even the British fleet of 19 carriers could not compete. The strategic balance in the Pacific had shifted entirely, not due to a single battle, but because of the relentless rise of American industry and manpower. When Japanese representatives surrendered aboard USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, they faced an unprecedented fleet, over 100 carriers and support vessels, more than the total any other nation had ever built in history. Commander Tamachihara, one of Japan's distinguished captains, admitted, "We sank 4 of their carriers in 1942, but they replaced each one 3 times. We did not lose to tactics or fleets. We lost to their production capacity and extraordinary determination." The Essex-Class were more than ships. They were symbols of a democratic nation's ability to unify toward a goal. Each vessel, every crew, every weld and steel plate told the story of American workers, from Margaret Thompson to millions of unnamed laborers, people who transformed tragedy, disaster, and loss into an unstoppable power. The victories of the Essex-Class proved that modern warfare was not just about tactics or technology, it was about superior production, effective training, and human resource utilization, where every element on land and sea combined into a perfect strategic whole. In June 1944, with the Philippine Sea victory, the U.S. demonstrated that the strategic balance had shifted in its favor, not by luck, but through industrial strength, manpower, and an indomitable will. As 1944 progressed, the United States entered a phase in which shipyards were operating at near maximum wartime rhythm. From Brooklyn, Newport News, and Philadelphia to Richmond, California, each day was a symphony of industry and labor, where thousands, from women and African Americans to skilled craftsmen and young engineers, worked tirelessly to transform steel machinery and aluminum into powerful Essex-Class carriers. In Brooklyn, Giuseppe Diageo's modular assembly team continuously refined ship decks and elevators. Prefabrication and onshore assembly had become standard, significantly reducing construction time. Moreover, every component on the ship was fully standardized: pumps, electrical panels, doors, aviation equipment, all compatible across different shipyards. This uniformity created a seamless production line, with each new ship emerging faster and stronger than the last. Meanwhile, Henry Kaiser and his shipyards continued producing escort carriers at unprecedented speeds. In Vancouver, the USS Casablanca, the first escort carrier of its class, was completed in under 8 months, providing fleet protection and anti-submarine capabilities for Pacific Island campaigns. These escort carriers exemplified the power of modern production methods, allowing the U.S. to control the seas, safeguard amphibious forces, and relieve direct pressure on the Essex-Class carriers. At sea, the strategic impact of the Essex-Class became evident. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 was the first clear demonstration. 6 Japanese carriers faced 9 Essex-Class and 8 light carriers. Japan lost nearly 600 aircraft and nearly all of its experienced pilots. The combination of ship numbers, squadron deployment capacity, radar, and modern flight deck design turned the engagement into the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a devastating defeat the Japanese could not have anticipated. Japanese officers from Ozawa to Toshikazu Omi no longer doubted. The U.S. not only replaced lost ships, but now possessed overwhelming superiority, thanks to continuous production and pilot training. Within the shipyards, production rates continued to accelerate. By January 1945, Brooklyn Navy Yard was building 3 ships simultaneously. Newport News had 6 ships at various stages, and Richmond operated thousands of modular workers. USS Lake Champlain, launched in June 1945, was completed in just 15 months, a wartime record. Techniques such as prefabrication, continuous welding, and component standardization not only shortened construction time, but also improved quality, ensuring each Essex-Class carrier was a fully optimized war machine. Behind the ships were inspiring human stories. Margaret Thompson, now a veteran welder, still stood in the Fore River shipyard, welding each seam as though each was retribution for Pearl Harbor. Emma Rodriguez continued as a symbol of women's industrial capability, while James Washington became a master fuel system engineer. These workers, along with millions of colleagues, did not just build ships. They built trust, hope, and victory, transforming every shipyard into a true war factory. Technological and labor innovations created a perfect strategic feedback loop. Essex-Class carriers were rapidly produced, fully manned thanks to training ships on the Great Lakes, deployed into combat, and victorious, while new ships continued to roll off the assembly lines. This left Japan unable to compensate for losses. They lost pilots and ships, while the U.S. continuously added both new vessels and aircrews, far surpassing Japan's training and production capabilities. The economic and social impact in the U.S. was enormous. Richmond, California grew from 23,000 to 130,000 residents in 3 years as workers flocked to Kaiser's shipyard. Billions of dollars in wages were paid, creating a new middle class and fueling economic growth. Women, African Americans, and previously restricted groups proved capable of performing complex industrial work, changing societal perceptions, and paving the way for post-war labor rights advancements. By August 1945, the U.S. had 14 Essex-Class carriers in combat, 3 more newly launched but not yet deployed, along with 9 Independence-class light carriers and 71 escort carriers. This force completely overwhelmed Japan, which had only 6 operational carriers, most with inadequately trained pilots. Even Britain, with 19 carriers, could not compete with U.S. production speed and quality. The strategic balance in the Pacific had fully shifted in favor of the United States. When Japanese representatives came to sign the surrender aboard USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, they faced an unprecedented fleet. More than 100 carriers and support vessels, exceeding the total number any other nation had ever built in naval history. Commander Tamichi Hara, one of Japan's most renowned captains, admitted, "We sank 4 of their carriers in 1942, but they replaced each one 3 times. We did not lose to tactics or fleets. We lost to their production capacity and extraordinary determination." America's victory in the Pacific was not merely the result of tactics or luck. It was due to industrial and human strength. Essex-Class carriers and escort carriers became symbols of absolute power, demonstrating that a democratic nation could harness its full production and workforce capacity to overwhelm the enemy. Each ship was not only a weapon of war, but a declaration. Production capability was the decisive weapon of modern warfare. The workers, from Margaret Thompson to Emma Rodriguez and James Washington, achieved a feat. A continuous line of Essex-Class carriers, each stronger and faster than the last, capable of changing the course of the war. They transformed the 1942 disaster, when the U.S. lost 4 carriers, into total dominance over the Pacific, proving that superior production and determination can overcome any adversary. Technological innovations, labor strategies, and production organization not only saved the U.S. Navy, but transformed American industry and society, ushering in a post-war era of prosperity and social progress. The skills, experience, and work ethic of these laborers became the foundation for U.S. industrial development in the following decades, and their legacy is still recognized today. By the time 1945 had passed, the U.S. Navy had reached the peak of its production capacity and strategic deployment. The Essex-Class carriers not only replaced the ships lost in the battles of 1942, but surpassed them in every aspect. Their numbers, speed of deployment, and overall quality created a force that completely dominated the Pacific, leaving Japan unable to compensate for its losses. At this point, the U.S. fleet consisted of 14 Essex-Class carriers that had seen combat, 3 newly launched Essex-Class carriers not yet in action, 9 Independence-class light carriers, 71 escort carriers, along with remaining battleships still in service. By comparison, Japan had only 6 operational carriers, many with inadequately trained pilots, and Britain, with 19 carriers of various types, could not compete. The war was decided not on the battlefield, but on the assembly lines and in the hands of American workers. The final battles in the Pacific, including Iwo Jima and Okinawa, showcased this overwhelming power. Essex-class carriers and escort carriers not only provided air superiority, but also supported amphibious landings, conducted anti-submarine patrols, and maintained secure supply lines. While Japanese forces suffered from a shortage of experienced pilots and modern ships, the U.S. simultaneously deployed dozens of squadrons, rendering enemy operations ineffective. This dominance extended beyond tactics. The U.S. transformed production capacity into a strategic weapon. Each Essex-class carrier not only replaced lost ships, but improved combat capability, carrying more aircraft, achieving higher speed, and enabling comprehensive operational effectiveness. Naval history had never seen a nation regenerate its combat forces faster than it suffered losses, applying relentless pressure on the enemy. Alongside the Essex-class, the escort carriers built by Kaiser played a critical role in Pacific Island campaigns. From USS Casablanca to USS Gambier Bay, these ships protected the fleet, hunted enemy submarines and aircraft, and ensured supply and amphibious operations ran smoothly. Using prefabrication and modular construction, each escort carrier was completed in under 8 months, far faster than the Japanese equivalent, which took 18 months to 2 years. The people behind the Essex-class were equally crucial. Workers like Margaret Thompson, Emma Rodriguez, James Washington, and millions of their colleagues turned the disasters of 1942 into motivation. Every weld, steel plate, and hour of labor carried the will to win, a spirit of vengeance for Pearl Harbor and Santa Cruz, and faith in the nation's eventual victory. This unity also reshaped American society. Richmond, California, grew from 23,000 to 130,000 residents in 3 years, with millions of dollars in wages boosting the economy. Women, African Americans, and previously restricted groups proved they could handle complex industrial work, paving the way for lasting changes in labor rights and social equality in the post-war era. When Japan signed the surrender documents aboard USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, its representatives faced an unprecedented fleet, more than 100 carriers, and support ships, more than the total built by all other nations combined throughout history. Commander Tamichihara, one of Japan's most renowned captains, admitted, "We sank 4 of their carriers in 1942. But they replaced each one 3 times. We did not lose to tactics or fleets. We lost to their production capacity and extraordinary determination." This event demonstrated that modern war is decided not only on the battlefield, but also in shipyards, on assembly lines, and by human hands. Essex-class carriers are living proof of the ability to turn disaster into opportunity, failure into victory, and show that a nation's true strength lies in production capacity, unity, and indomitable will. The legacy of the Essex-class extends beyond the military. Modular construction, automated welding, standardized components, and prefabrication revolutionized American industry. Workers, from welders to installers to engineers, laid the foundation for post-war industrial development. Women, African Americans, and previously limited groups proved they could handle complex industrial tasks, opening the door to long-term social progress. The Essex-Class and escort carrier fleets demonstrated that a nation's strength rests not only in weapons, but also in its people, production capacity, and unyielding will. They did not merely build ships, they built victory, freedom, and the future. Each Essex-Class carrier served as a reminder that a democratic nation, when united in purpose, can overcome any challenge and dominate any enemy. By 1945, the U.S. had not only overcome the disasters of 1942, but had created a superior, overwhelming, and undeniable fleet. The Essex-Class carriers became symbols of industrial and human power, showing that victory relies not only on tactics or technology, but on production capacity and the unified will of society. The conclusion of this story is a testament to the power of democracy and unlimited production capability. From losing 4 carriers in 1942, the U.S. achieved absolute dominance in the Pacific thanks to the Essex-Class and escort carriers, establishing a model of modern warfare in which production determined victory more than any single battle. Workers like Margaret Thompson and millions of others left an enduring legacy. They proved that when freedom is threatened, human determination and production power can defeat any enemy, from warships to entire fleets, from strategic plans to opposing forces. And that is the story of the 4 carriers lost in 1942 and the 14 Essex-Class carriers born in wartime, a clear testament to a nation's capacity to recover, innovate, and overwhelm. These ships did more than fight. They inspired, transformed society, and shaped America's future. Finally, when viewing the U.S. fleet on the day of surrender, all who witnessed it acknowledged, victory was not due to luck, nor a single naval battle, but to production capability, people, and extraordinary determination. The Essex-Class carriers and those who built them turned the 1942 disaster into total victory in 1945, becoming enduring symbols of industrial might and American democratic spirit.